Okay, much better. Apparently I was muted. Thank you so much for coming in today. I'm going to take an hour of your time. I understand it's Friday. Would rather be home looking at new things, something for the weekend. But I wanted to talk about CMMC from a different angle. I'm sure you guys have been through countless CMMC presentations. And today I wanted to have a different take and different angle of CMMC. More importantly, how do we acquire new DIB customers? How do we nurture that the customer base and generate business in this emerging ecosystem? So let's get started. I'm Sai Khan. I've been involved with CMMC since the start. I think I saw Katie present somewhere in summer of 2019 with EIA, and ever since, we've been involved in putting together action plans for different organizations to go to market, to spread the word for CMMC, and have done countless campaigns and events in the ecosystem. This is really my first time being in front of the camera myself. I'm usually behind the scenes. Leslie Weinstein and I have a show, Dip Tech Talk. So we have been spreading the word using that kind of asset in the past. And I have a deep tactical experience working with startups, new organizations. Their challenges are separate from large enterprises. And there's a lot of tactical work involved. And I've spent about 20 years working on B2B marketing projects. So I'm going to be sharing some pretty useful information today. I hope you find it's something to noodle over this coming weekend. The other thing I wanted to mention, forgot, that if you have any questions, please email those to me at sayam@strides.agency. I have it at the bottom here. That's SAYAM at strides.agency. You can email it to me during this presentation, and when I reach the end, I'll go through my email and answer them one by one. So appreciate that. So let's start with some self-evident business truths. I think it's important to put them out there. First is today, I want you to wear your common sense hat for business. I won't be bothering you with a lot of lingo and jargon and whatnot. I want you to evaluate what I'm suggesting, how we look at this world from your common sense that has already done you so well. So stick with that. The second thing I would say is when we think about growth, we think about starting new things. We can look at inspirations. We can look at that XYZ individual who did so well and now they're a unicorn and et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is, those are outliers. So when I work on marketing and when I think about growth, I think of industrial averages first. And from that point of view, stuff here is going to sound a little subdued to you because we are sticking with industrial averages and not so much this aspirational mindset. And this industrial average is what's also easy to sell across your organization. And item number 3 for our self-evident business truths is, I'm talking about CMMC marketing, but in reality, all these roads end up with NIST 800-171 compliance. Right now, CMMC is not fully baked yet. So even if you get inquiries for CMMC related services, I'm pretty sure you're going to wrap them up into NIST 800-171, knowing that NIST 800-171 is wholly included in CMMC. And that's the right way to proceed. CMMC may take another year to fully finalize, but DFARS 7012 is still here. So whatever drives the interest for you, doesn't matter. You're going to take that DIB contractor and get them through the ringer for NIST 800-171 compliance. So these are self-evident business truths. Awesome. Let's begin with, what does marketing do anyway? We have seen marketing folks, work in different organizations. My audience today, you guys are engineers, cybersecurity professionals. You've seen us, marketing folks, inviting people into, meeting halls and arranging lunch and presenting in different events and sending out emails and communications or talking to the press. So we have a hodgepodge of an idea of what marketing does and not a lot about, precisely what it does. So I wanted to address that, especially in the context of what we are doing in CMMC. And I'll touch that in one second. The other thing I wanted to mention is when we evaluate marketing and we think about this marketing world, it is not as deterministic as cybersecurity world is. So for example, let's say you have a client who doesn't have a COI enclave or a way to manage that. That's a very deterministic thing. You figure it out. They don't have any way to handle CUI. then you give them CUI solution, and then it works. And sometimes, it doesn't work. Maybe something is missing. Maybe networking is not done right. So it's very logical. It's very consistent. And if you're going and you're reasoning from step 1 to step 2, you will end up in step 3 and 4. You just have to hop along in your reasoning. But in marketing, the world is not that deterministic. Here we are more probabilistic. So our thinking is more like, if we do something, then there's a likelihood of a result. There's a percent, and that percent is where the industrial average or your averages come into play. And then we do something else, and there's a likelihood of something else happening. And then we do something else, and there's a likelihood of something else happening. So the connecting tissue in our reasoning elements is percents and probability. And it goes a long way to understand that and follow it through. So with that in mind, let's talk about what marketing does. First and foremost, it drives business value. That's Steve Jobs' famous line. It's an old presentation he gave before he came back to Apple. It's worth looking at. But in our context, what value means is, specifically, you have a stronger recognition within the DIB sector for your cybersecurity services. And you have done that by establishing an area of expertise. You may be an expert in CUI, maybe you have a product there, maybe you're really good with policies, you've done a lot of work there. So the DIB sector knows you. Doesn't mean that they're ready to buy from you. They just know, hey, these guys are pretty cool, and I've seen their work, and I remember them. All of that is what we marketers call brand awareness. And brand awareness is critical because, when the time comes to buy, people want to be thinking of you. You can't always get to them at the moment they buy. You, however, want to get to them before they buy, which is why right now, if you were looking for car insurance, you'll probably be able to come up with 3 or 4 names on top of your mind, Geico, Travelers, what have you. And the reason for that is these organizations have done tremendous work in driving their brand awareness. Similarly, in CMMC ecosystem, there is a concept of brand awareness by way of unique and amazing things you can produce, show to the world. A very visible example in our space, and I have no relations, I'm just simply mentioning them, is, CMC Center of Awesomeness. That's a pretty cool set of content that I'm sure you guys have seen, Ton Cornelius's. So all that activity is driving brand awareness for that organization. That's marketing. Then the second value that a good marketing team will deliver for you is that there will be an increasing interest within the market for you and your industry. So it's not just, we don't want to assume that people out there are ready to buy from you. It's hardly the case, and the DIB sector is not even remotely there. So you kind of have to do the work to drive interest, to drive that motivation and pull them together. All of those activities we call demand generation, and they can be quantified and tracked over time. So a good value that a business, that marketing delivers to you is obviously demand generation, especially in these times. Then I would say the third thing that is of good value to you is you want to be able to tangibly see that you're getting more traffic, qualified traffic, or digital visitors to your website, or whatever assets you may have. Maybe if you're very active on LinkedIn, to LinkedIn. And this is important because you don't get the sale right away. There's a series of things that happen beforehand. Your brand recognition goes up, you're doing demand generation. Now people are starting to visit your website. Things are starting to boil up. The water isn't hot yet, but it's starting to get there. And then item number 4, and that's something I think we all recognize, and this is something ubiquitous, and that is compelling content that inspires, motivates, and ultimately sells. So naturally, a good thing that a marketing team would do for you is they would create you blog posts, websites, slicks, ads, and so on, things that can compel someone and inspire someone to take an action. And this is a critical part of marketing, but not the only part of marketing. And it's a common misunderstanding on that regard. And then lastly, as a culmination of all these efforts, is that you get more inbound and outbound service-related inquiries. People calling you saying, hey, I need help with CMMC or DFARS 7012 compliance. Are you guys the right shop? So when that occurs, when somebody calls you in for that, or somebody says, yeah, I'm interested in talking to you about this, marketers call it a conversion event. And that's an important thing. We like to track this, and we'd like to see how things go over time. So now, for summary, if you ever wonder, hey, what is marketing doing for us in CMMC ecosystem? And these are the 4 or 5 things that are the most significant that marketing should be doing for you. And if you look at this and you say, we have created compelling content, but we have never done demand generation, we have never done campaigns around brand awareness and so on, then you have an opportunity and you can do more. Here, I wanted to summarize the same thing in a digestible format, and I would suggest printing that out and keeping it handy. It's almost like a checklist. As you look at this mind map right now, ask yourself, have we done all these things if they apply? So, in the 4 pillars of modern tech marketing, especially as they are applicable to CMMC, first is content creation. Do you have a website, a brochure, a blog, social media posts? Typically, the team here is going to be writers, designers, and perhaps coders who can establish and design your website. Then we have something called brand marketing, and as I mentioned, brand awareness brand is just simply what people think of you, of your institution, what they say when they encounter your name. And so, for example, when we think of Google, we think of trusted results, search results. That's Google's brand. Similarly, what is your brand? Are you recognized because you're a well-known speaker? Are you recognized because you've produced something really good in the industry? My brand, for instance, is that, I produce a lot of content in the space, so the folks who are close to the content know my efforts. For brand marketing, we look at branded ads and paid search. We look at billboards, airport ads. You could be doing TV, news, PR spots. Public relations is a huge industry where a lot of work goes in there. And, typically you have designers, PR analysts, and folks who specialize in this type of space. Then coming to the other side, I'll start with demand generation, which I touched briefly before too. This is the act of getting everybody to listen in and to drive interest in what you have to say and what the industry is about. Here, the team includes campaign managers. We could be doing in-person events in real life, which is called field marketing. There's a lot of work there, as well as digital marketing. My own personal career bulk of it has been spent in demand generation. And these are, in a way, very distinct skill sets. People who are creating design and art are not thinking the same way as folks who are crunching a lot of numbers to manage your paid search ads. So inevitably, you definitely need more than one person to be able to have full coverage on all the core components of marketing. Or at the very least, you want to have one person with all the 4 skill sets, which is pretty hard. I think of myself as a strong generalist, but I absolutely cannot do all of this. I've been doing this for 20 years. Impossible for me to do all of this. I have team members who can help me out as I go along. And then the last thing here is conversion optimization. This is frequently overlooked. Most people, especially companies that have been around for a while, they find that they already have incoming traffic. People are visiting them, checking them out, but they haven't designed their website in a way that inspires someone to take an action. For example, you're not asking for their name and phone number right away. Maybe you're not even giving them the right content up front. So for example, if you want to sell CMMC related services and your website has no mention of CMMC, it's probably going to be pretty hard to convince someone to call you, especially if somebody else has a website that talks about CMMC. So from that point of view, when we look at a website and say, okay, is it doing its job in convincing someone? All of that falls under conversion optimization. And here you typically have copywriters and designers who can take an existing website and make it a lot better. Awesome. So continuing with the same theme, what makes marketing go forward? Here I wanted to examine some of the core elements of marketing that we are usually engaged with. And those 3 things are assets that I already mentioned, your website, the stuff we want to show to the world, a slick and infographic, and so on. Then you have a channel. Channel is the means by which you transfer that asset to your target audience. And a lot of times we find that folks are able to develop assets, but they aren't doing all the necessary exercises to get this channel to the right audience, get the assets to the right audience. And for that, you need to have a strong handle on different channels. Like your team must have expertise in social media, YouTube, events, and so on. And when you mix channels with assets, the building blocks, you get what we call a campaign. Campaign is a unified set of activities that we do to drive specific business results. It's the end result of hooking up assets with channels. So let's take an example. Let's say there is a CMMC event, in-person event in Austin. In fact, there is. And your team's CMC VP is going there in person. So if I was your marketer, I'd be asking, well, what's the goal? Why are we going there? The goals are two. One is we want to drive awareness. Maybe you're a keynote speaker. Maybe you have a good booth in a good spot. You'll have a big banner behind you, so people will look up and say, "Oh yeah, that's an XYZ company. Okay, so what do they do?" So maybe they'll come to you. They'll get curious. They'll ask questions. That is all driving awareness. Just putting your booth there is probably not going to convince somebody to buy from you, but at least they will get to know who you are. And repetition here matters. So when you're thinking of awareness, you got to be there often. And then the second goal might be, hey, we want at least a couple of appointments from related to CMC out of this. I'm just using two as an example, but there could be more. So when you mix it all together, a lot of folks think that marketing campaigns, especially in that scenario, involve that we create a booth, then we present to the audience, and then the audience asks for help from you. Rarely does it ever go this way. If only it was that simple. A lot of times, the campaign is a lot more complex. You may have an in-person event like I just described, but then you have to do an email follow-up because they're going to forget you. They may have visited hundreds of other people. So their forgetting is a problem, and which is why you want to get to them right away. Then everybody's email following, but you might have a better webinar than the other guy. So throw in your webinar. Do an email follow-up, do an additional webinar, then people who show up on the webinar get a phone call follow-up from your team. Hey, I saw you came to my webinar. I've seen great interest in XYZ. Would you like to schedule some time so we can go over how we can fulfill your cybersecurity requirements? We are skilled in, NIST 171 compliance. We got a great staff members to go. We're offering free consultation on gap analysis. I'm just making it up. How would you like to schedule a few minutes to have a quick chat with our cybersecurity engineers? So this is where you're suggesting in the phone call that they talk to your technical folks. And, if you make 100 phone calls, you're probably going to get meetings with, 20 or 30. Then after that, you've done your presentation. Fewer still are going to receive the contract. As you all know, not everybody who receives the presentation ends up buying. So they sit through your meeting, and let's say half of them say, okay, I'm interested, send me your contract. I want to see what you guys are about. And then from contract, fewer still end up signing it, usually after 3 to 6 months. So, that's the average life cycle. Unless you run into an account that is being compelled by their contractual obligation to square away their CMMC compliance, the odds are that the DIB sector as of now is going to sit and wait for and think about whether they want to get into it or not. So a typical campaign that delivers results is on the right side, and what we think delivers results is on the left side. So if we start doing marketing with assumptions which are on the left side, we're going to be disappointed. And a lot of folks have been disappointed in lack of response in the overall industry. But it is definitely not a dead industry. There's a lot going on here. You just have to know how to crack this nut the right way. Because things are becoming smaller, in reality, what ends up happening is we develop a funnel. Like a funnel has a lot of things at the top and fewer at the bottom. So what happens is, you have these awareness channels, the way by which people get to know you. They're typically YouTube, industry events, webinars, blogs, infographics. This type of content builds your reputation, but by itself is not sufficient to drive a sale. You may put out a video out there that may be viewed by hundreds of times, but you already know that you may barely get a call out of that. And that's because there's a very sharp funnel that's coming down. And if you haven't done the math, you wouldn't know exactly what's being lost where. So a good marketing team would have a solid handle on the funnel. We quantify the stuff in Excel. In real life, especially with working with other professionals on large accounts, we notice, huge Excel files and the BI solutions can be dedicated to just good visibility into these funnels. It's really that important. And then as you go down the funnel, you start hitting conversion channels. Those are Google organic. If somebody is really serious for your services, they're going to search for things like CMMC RP in Huntsville, Alabama. When somebody's that precise about their geographic location, there's a good chance they're intending on buying something. So that's going to be an evaluation or purchase part of the funnel, ENF. So one of the things we want to do is you want to be sure that you get to ENF as quickly as you can while you're building A and B. So top of the funnel needs a lot of work, and bottom of the funnel needs the work as well. And some of the other channels in the bottom of the funnel include sales development reps, folks who can, you know, call on your behalf and convince somebody to sit in a meeting with you. It can be really helpful. And this also captures my initial comment about probability. As you can tell, not everybody in awareness is going into interest. So if there's, let's say, 40% drop here, then we can say, we can quantify what is the likelihood that somebody is going to convert into interest and what is the likelihood that they're going to go down. And as you can see, that drops pretty fast. Now let's talk about some channel misconceptions. As I work with a lot of clients and things we see out there, and it's important to clarify those up front. We assume on the left side, a channel like Google, that you can be number one in Google for terms like CMMC by using a WordPress plugin. That's pretty unlikely. Think about it. A free WordPress plugin is available to everyone, and most definitely will not be enough to, move Google DoD out of the first spot for CMMC. It's just not going to happen. Then on the right side, the reality is Google employs a complex set of variables for search engine positions, and most definitely WordPress wouldn't do anything. The kind of things that do make a difference are fast speeding websites, mobile friendly, well-read and referenced websites when big in Google. Google loves them. A great example of such a website is cmmcaudit.org. It's Amira's website. I'm sure you guys have seen it. That website has a strong presence in Google. She produces a ton of great content and is pretty consistent with what Google likes. And the second option, the thing we generally assume, is that in LinkedIn, the DIB marketing is clearly saturated as everybody is doing a webinar on LinkedIn. So if you're on LinkedIn and you're following hashtag CMMC, you're going to see a lot of folks like myself and yourself. They're doing webinars and events. And the first thing that comes to mind is, gosh, this is also saturated. But the truth is that it's not saturated at all. LinkedIn is not the place where DIB is sitting around and looking for buying services in cybersecurity. And we don't recommend that you look at LinkedIn as a source of sales as much as just to get the brand awareness out and get basic recognition. The bottom line is what you see on LinkedIn is not a reflection of reality. The DIB is 300,000 strong. On CMMC hashtag, there are less than 1,000 followers. So it just doesn't even add up. The math isn't there. I wouldn't be discouraged by what I see on LinkedIn. And the third thing is flashy website design can help you win a big DIB account. No, the DIB sector doesn't necessarily care about look and feel as much right now. They are small businesses, a lot of them manufacturers with thin margin. In fact, they might be scared away with something that looks too flashy. What is more important is that your content is fast loading. It's really relevant. If you do CMMC, then make sure you tell them what you do in CMMC and how cool you are about it. And then the website has to be convincing. There's something about it that makes them feel good about doing business with you. You inspire trust, you have good credibility, you have good results, and then people will fill out your website form and ask for services. And another common misconception we have is let's try something new. There's always something new and flashy over the horizon. So things like Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, these are consumer channels. They have nothing to do with our world. Nobody's selling Microsoft cloud services on Facebook. So there's no point in wasting time on those channels. And that's a key part of marketing. Any amateur can just go ahead and create a Instagram account. It doesn't require rocket knowledge, but we have the knowledge of knowing that that channel It's not useful for driving cybersecurity sales worth hundreds of thousands of dollars to the defense industrial base. So going back to my original comment about using your common sense, just wear your business hat to see, hey, does this make sense? I ask you, would you buy a cybersecurity service from an Instagram ad? Probably not. That's not why you're there. You may buy some consumer products, you may buy beauty products, health products, but you're probably not going to buy cybersecurity services. So it's important that as you think about these channels and you think about, you start building a mental model of how this world works, it's grounded in reality. And a lot of times you can do a gut check yourself. Hey, if I'm a DIB sector company, would I do that? If the answer is no, you're probably on the right track. Apparently I muted myself. All right. So now let's talk about selling to the public sector versus the defense industrial base. The federal government on the left side is, a lot of folks that I work with have experience in capture, and you have a mental model about how that world works. And the risk is that you don't want to think of selling to the DIB sector the same way you think about selling to the federal government. They are separate entities, and there are some very important differences between them that needs to be addressed right away. The first is the federal government or any public sector entity is usually a considered informed purchase. Their government entities are sitting there making critical business decisions, and therefore it is easy to get to them through rational discussion and to get to them with a compelling case. But on the right side, the buyer in the DIB sector is not entirely understanding of what's being purchased. As you know, the DIB sector companies are typically small businesses, manufacturers, service providers. They're not in the business of cybersecurity. So even when they know they have a requirement to fulfill with NIST 171, they don't necessarily understand what it takes. What do you mean monitoring? What do you mean CUI handling? What is an enclave and so on? Penetration testing, red teaming, blue team. Our world has so much lingo, they don't have it. So an important point here is, just like I'm not bombarding you guys with lingo, don't bombard your DIB customers with something they don't understand. You want to be accessible. You want to be the one on their team helping, coaching them through the process. The second thing about federal government is they will definitely buy from somebody. If it's not you, it's your next, your next competitor, which means if if there are three of you and you're competing for 9 contracts, at least one of you is going to get something. Statistically, the odds are in your favor. But on the right side, since this is an open market, the DIB sector company may shop around and may choose not to buy. And that happens a lot more than you think. They're like, okay, that's cool, but I think we're going to put that in fiscal year 2020 budget line item. And the federal government doesn't do that. So these type of disappointments, if you will, do exist on the right side. And when you think about your own growth, your pipeline, how much revenue you want to drive from this business, you have to account for this. And usually it can be quantified. If you have historical data that tells you, we only close 20% of our sales, then you know how many people you need to be talking to in order to hit that number. Then we come to the left side again. This time, good proposals and existing infrastructure matters to the federal government. They want to buy, they want you to be they want you to be compliant with various standards. They have accounting standards, cybersecurity stuff is new, and so on. But on the right side, we're dealing with an open market, and it comes with all the bells and whistles that comes with it. There are certain types of things here that are not necessarily true, like I mentioned, but more importantly, they may not be that into your proposal or existing infrastructure. There's a little bit of, but there's more of your ability to convince someone by way of communications to do business with you, because their purchase is not as rational as in the case of federal government. And from that point of view, your communication chops do matter a lot when selling to the DIB sector. And then on the left side, you as business owner, when you're working with public sector entities, you have more certainty for closing the business. You know they will definitely buy. So you go into that line of business knowing that, hey, I'm gonna bring revenue if I compete for XYZ contracts. But when it comes to the DIB sector, you could literally talk to 5 or 10 companies and none of them may end up purchasing from you. depending on the situation and so on. So this is an important difference, and it's the one on the right side is more consistent with what I mentioned earlier, that this world is more probabilistic, the DIB sector world, and the federal government world is more deterministic. Awesome. So now let's talk about some tips that I can share additionally with you guys. In your quest for finding marketing growth, you're going to run into a lot of folks, and some of them are going to throw interesting lingo at you. Growth hacking, guerrilla marketing, etc. None of that works in our space. If you're selling a consumer product, like maybe you're printing t-shirts with a cool style, those things work. But when it comes to selling mature cybersecurity services to a mature buyer, these techniques don't work, and I wouldn't recommend wasting time with them. The second thing I would say is, in our space, marketing doesn't immediately deliver paying customers if you just started. This is more like a couch to 5K type of commitment. It's way more important for you to consistently do some marketing than to just put in an extreme burst of energy, exhaust yourself or your budget, and walk away. So if you think about how you train for 5K, you're gonna do a little bit early on. You're gonna get comfortable with running twice a week. Maybe next week you'll run a little bit more. The week after you'll add another day, and you'll build on your existing success like a pyramid. Marketing growth works the same way. If you start your marketing, just start slowly. Take steps, baby steps, if you will. Get comfortable with them, build success with them in awareness or maybe interest. And then, once you have more of that, you can start converting into sales. Third thing I would say is a lot of folks talk about leads. There's a lot of, it's not hard to find connections in the DIB sector. You can go to sam.gov and many places to download records. But those folks are not necessarily interested in buying from you. So we don't worry too much about leads. What we want to worry about is marketing qualified leads, MQLs. And marketing qualified leads are the leads that have interacted and engaged with our content. So typically what we do is, we can start tracking individuals that come to our website or read our emails or attend our webinars, and we give them scores. So if somebody comes to your webinar, they get a 5 score. Somebody downloads your blog, they get 1 score. And what a marketer typically does is we have a threshold. We say if somebody hits 10, they are qualified enough, maybe we should give them a buzz. So marketing qualified leads is a scoring system. And when a certain score is hit, lead score is hit, the lead is what we call marketing qualified. We then want somebody else to call them and set up an appointment. Fourth thing I would say is marketing cannot rescue last minute because it takes time to ramp up, because it's a couch to 5K type of commitment. You can't come last minute and say, okay, our biz dev efforts didn't work. We tried to reach out to the DIB sector companies directly. Let's get a pro and let's see if we can get a result this month because we got to deliver revenue this month. Marketing won't be able to help. I won't be able to help. It takes a little bit more than a month, at least 3 months, running 5 to 6 months easy before you're able to generate real revenue out of your marketing efforts. And that has a lot to do with the buying motivation of the DIB sector, which I'll get into in a second. And last thing I would mention is marketing, even if it's done right, doesn't do 100% of the selling. It is pretty impossible to convince somebody to spend hundreds of $1,000s worth of cybersecurity services by purely email or by purely a webinar. They're going to need to talk to someone in person. And that's where sales consultation is critical. The DIB sector isn't self-motivated enough to reach out to you and say, hey, I need help. So it is important for somebody to reach out to them and say, hey, you need help and I can help you. So sales function is a necessary part of driving revenue in the DIB sector. Marketing alone just cannot carry the weight. It doesn't have that strength yet. Now compare that, for instance, let's say you were selling MFA solution with USB keys. I'm just making it up. And you want somebody to buy that for 20, 30 bucks from your e-commerce store. That's also cybersecurity, but it's a small purchase. It doesn't require a lot of commitment. In that case, marketing can carry the weight all the way. We can make the sale happen without that lead wanting to talk to someone because it's a $30 purchase to get that USB key. But in our case, which is mostly, CMC related consulting services, it's not possible. Sales is necessary. And if you're doing marketing but no sales, I'm going to bet that you're not seeing the revenue that you should be seeing. Awesome. So now let's talk about the DIB sector in greater detail and understanding what the defense industrial base is and what are its core attributes. It is estimated there are about 300,000 organizations plus consultants in the DIB sector. This estimate has been around for 2 years. I don't think it's that big now. It's probably shrunk a little bit, and there are many data points that indicate that. But to my knowledge, nobody still has compiled the entire data set yet. And that's because there could be a large manufacturer who has a single source supplier whose only job is to do, nickel plating on some equipment. And that nickel plating shop may not show up in anybody's database. So it's an estimate. Then we know that the sector is scattered across nation and allied nations. There's no one place where you can find them. They're not all in California. They're not all in Connecticut. They're everywhere. Then we know there are roughly 10 large prime contractors. DoD themselves mentioned that. They're like Boeing, Lockheed, Raytheon, and so on. These prime contractors are the ones that manufacture most of our weapon systems, and they're not the ones who need CMMC. They're doing really well, and they're not anybody's target audience anyways. Then we have a few hundred large suppliers to these primes. The primes need somebody to manufacture the things, just making it up. If you're making, F-35, somebody has to make the airframe. So that's probably going to be the first large supplier to Lockheed. And there aren't that many large suppliers. These large suppliers are generally on top of their game and have pretty stringent requirements beforehand in NIST 800-171 compliance. This is the tier 1, if you will. The actual volume of large suppliers is small. It's less than 1,000. I don't remember the exact number here. Then we have the most important segment here. We have hundreds of thousands of secondary suppliers, contractors, consultants, and they do everything for the DoD, from vaccinations to training to lawn mowing to gold plating some equipment to producing COTS item and so on. So folks who are active in the DIB sector, cybersecurity folks, they already know this. This is where the bulk of the business remains. This is where the opportunity lies. The DoD itself has mentioned that these groups are the ones that don't have enough cybersecurity hygiene. And this is the part of the DIB sector where the CI is being exfiltrated. And this is the part of the sector that needs help. This is the part of the sector that fits the profile of folks who are not that aware of their CMC obligations and need a lot of education and convincing. They're not necessarily, the wealthiest buyers you have run into. These are small businesses. There are fewer than 20 employees and most certainly have earnings less than 10 million a year. They typically have little to no IT staff, although they may be outsourcing their IT needs to an MSP. They practically have little to no understanding of cybersecurity, although fingers crossed, I hope things are changing on that front. A lot of us have expended a lot of energy in educating this group in cybersecurity, hygiene, and what they need to do, including myself. So, if this group wakes up and says, hey, I need cybersecurity, I need to update my cybersecurity posture, that's going to instantly change the economy of our industry. This is the sleeping giant that needs to wake up. Everybody else knows about their obligations, but this giant still needs to wake up. They're also not that motivated to spend on cyber, broadly speaking, if their revenue is so low. They haven't had a chance to prioritize it. It is estimated that roughly half of these guys have some understanding of half of 300,000 have some understanding of CMMC or NIST 800-171 compliance. So there's a bit of an opportunity there for sure. None of this sounds particularly interesting, except that, guess what? They all need to comply with DFARS 7012, and NIST 800-171 compliance is not optional for these guys. And that's why we are interested in talking to them, because they can deny and walk away from their obligations, but it doesn't help because they need to deliver on what is required. So based on that knowledge and some of our work, these are the typical buying behaviors of the DIB sector. They're not going to be motivated or impressed by the look or feel of your marketing assets, which is why I would say, you do things like website update, but don't spend tens of thousands of dollars to get, DC-based branding firms to give you a cool tech branding with the hope that you can impress a small business to do business with you. This is not going to happen. It's not the best use of your money. But these are small businesses, so you don't want to look too fancy to them. You want to be accessible, price accessible, and you want to be relevant. Recognize also that their biggest, the biggest competition that you have is their inertia, their lack of motivation. It's not your next door RP. I mean, you could give your warm leads to your next door RP and they're going to have the same hard time converting them as you have. The bigger problem is you got to convince your set of customers that are prospects that you've already encountered to buy from you. So inertia is an enemy, and inertia needs to be dealt with. The best way to deal with their inertia, obviously, is if the government can come up with a compliance mandate. CMMC is obviously the big thing. But in my book, even if they require a minimum SPURS score or a minimum compliance with the NIST 800-171 practices, then their inertia can be moved. As soon as it's mandatory, inertia goes out the door. So hoping a lot of work gets done on this front. I'm on edge. I keep track of the variables that can influence these guys' behaviors. Is there a mention of, last night I saw a mention of an NIST 800-171 requirement in an RFP. So that was a great start. And there are similarly other things here that we can look at that can, sort of change their motivation and encourage them to take cybersecurity seriously. Then they're not looking for you on social media. And that includes LinkedIn, as I mentioned earlier. We all are on social media. Doesn't mean we're ready to buy right away. So, don't worry too much about investing all your eggs in social media and realizing, hey, nothing is converting to sales. They are price sensitive. That's why you don't want to look overly expensive. My advice about not looking too high end is actually a strategic call. Even if you have the funds, there are better ways of using it. And by most surveys, at least half of the DIB sector knows of its NIST 800-171 obligation, and they have attempted some form of obligation. This segment is obviously a great target for marketing and sales. So anybody who already knows, has done a little bit, they can be convinced to do more, as opposed to somebody who's starting from scratch and has no background. Excuse me. Then obviously you can and should motivate both halves to take action. However, the second one, which already knows, is much better. And the bottom line for all of them is cyber hygiene is non-optional as per DFARS 7012. So CMMC or not, they got to take cyber hygiene seriously, and they have an existing obligation to fulfill. So you should unapologetically remind them of what is at stake. We are getting bombarded with cyber attacks everywhere, from ransomware to stuff being stolen from the DIB sector. All of that is useful in convincing others to take cyber hygiene seriously. And in that respect, the sort of fear is necessary because it's reality. So don't worry about fear selling, because you're reality selling. The reality is fearsome at the moment. The other thing you should know is, they're not probably going to make the buying decisions entirely on their own. They typically have gatekeepers. So a lot of times we have run into the MSPs, and MSPs are, IT folks, and IT is not the same as cybersecurity, different skill set. So what you have to do is, inevitably, once you make connection with the DIB sector companies, you may end up working with their MSPs, and they may or may not know about cybersecurity. So here you can be, working with them, or if you develop your relationship and work with additional clients that MSPs may have. But be prepared to run into gatekeepers as you do your marketing and sales to the DIB sector. So the bottom line about the sector is that it's large. There's at least 50% market penetration for CMMC and NIST 800-171 concepts. It is required still to invest in cybersecurity, although it's based on self-attestation, which we know doesn't work. It's still reluctant about the investment that it needs to make in CMC. but it can still become convinced with a compelling campaign because it is required to do what they're punting. So bottom line is it's a little bit more work, but can be accomplished with smart work. Which then brings us to sales. Nothing like Glengarry Glen Ross. I guess I'll check it out again over the weekend. ABC, Always Be Closing. Great movie if you haven't seen it. So wanted to give you additional content on this front that sales and marketing in this space go hand in hand. And it is, like I said, impossible to do just marketing and expect sales to come out of this. So, and sales, the profession of sales is most definitely not just for used cars. B2B technology marketing heavily relies on sales. I've worked for large organizations, and we typically work very closely with sales teams where we, nurture leads, make them marketing qualified, we give them to sales. Sales does their job. They come back to us, tell us, give us their feedback. This is what happened. This is what we learned. Then we go back and tweak. So this is a game between sales and marketing. Cannot emphasize that enough. If you're thinking about going to market with CMMC, if you have revenue targets here, and the only thing you've thought about is marketing, not enough. Something else is involved, which is sales. The price point is basically too high for someone to purchase without speaking to a convincing consultant. I talked about wearing your common sense business hat. So same thing, you're not going to buy $100,000 worth of services without talking to someone and being utterly convinced about the need. Similarly, know that if you send an email out of the blue to sam.gov users requesting that they buy a cybersecurity service from you, is not going to happen. You can send thousands of emails and all of them will ignore you. The price point is too high. Typically, those things work when there's an impulse buy involved. You want to sell something to somebody's impulse, but that's not what's happening here. And then, a combination of sales and marketing delivers the results, as I mentioned earlier. And lastly, do you have your sales house in order? If you don't have it, you got to start budgeting for it together with marketing, because that's what it takes. Hopefully that's making sense. So in our space, I want to talk a little bit about some of the basics here, the core skill sets you need to bring to the table that can be yours or somebody else's. One is business development reps. These folks are not going to be your technical sales staff. They're going to be skilled in breaking through the gatekeepers and scheduling meetings. So the BDR folks, their main job is to schedule appointments with warm leads, the marketing qualified leads. And in those appointments, their promise is, we're going to show you what is necessary to get into NIST 171 compliance, come talk to our cyber engineer, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have account executives. And these are the folks who are tasked with executing the sales process from the first meeting that BDR has set all the way to sign contract. And they may bring cybersecurity professionals in the call. They may bring other folks to help out with the process. Sales engineers can also join the process. But typically, since you're convincing a small business to spend all that money, you should recognize that account execs have a serious work to do, and they really need to be equipped and empowered with excellent marketing and business development skills. So they are at the bottom. Above them is biz dev, and above biz dev is marketing. It is possible to have one individual wear both hats. You could, for instance, call your warm leads, schedule an appointment, and then be on the appointment and talk to them. And that's a great way to kickstart your business and build your initial set of customers, but it's not going to scale. These are, at the end, two very different skill sets, and it's better to specialize in each of them. So over time, you want to have a separate BDR team, or at least one individual who's tasked with appointment setting your warm leads, and then you have a dedicated account exec who's tasked with taking that warm lead all the way to contract. And account execs will then be trained in professional selling. They also have their own little steps they go through. They have their own sales funnel. There's a lot of body of knowledge that goes into selling at a high level. If you want to check out Miller Hyman sales strategies. This is a great way to manage large complex sales. So definitely encourage you to think about how you can get these two skill sets as part of your sales team, because without that, it's going to be pretty hard for your marketers to bring in business. Hopefully that makes sense. And if you want, Strides Agency, my firm can also help out with BizDev. Another thing I wanted to mention here is partnership blind corners. A lot of folks are part of partnerships. We've been around for 2 years in this space. We all know each other, so it makes sense to partner up. You will see RPs and RPOs are going to partner with technology providers. The biggest of them all, Microsoft, has tons of partners in this space, and similarly other companies too. A lot of problem with this is that, you can get part of a partnership, but if somebody is not talking to the DIB sector and doing all these things that I described, you all are just going to sit there and see that nothing is happening. So just be mindful of that. And there's another common sense thing. I mean, if all of the partners say, yeah, we are super awesome in cybersecurity, but hey, who's reaching out to the DIB and doing all the hard work, the grunt work that needs to be done? And there's nobody, then you have a problem. So don't have this blind corner. Once you establish a partnership with anyone, you can always divvy up the cost for sales and marketing and launch an aggressive acquisition campaigns and really go with it. And for all of this thing, plan at least for 6 to 12 months because your sales are not going to come in less than 3 months. The DIP sector, as I mentioned, needs a lot of convincing, which means more campaigns, more touch points, and longer buying cycles. But it converts, people are making money, and that's because it's a requirement. Which then brings me to how I can help you. Today I touched the basics of what is involved in doing this stuff. I would highly encourage you to noodle this over the weekend, and think about what are the areas where you're lacking and start to fill up those gaps. I can also help you out with this. I can help you implement and execute a robust marketing plan that is reasonably likely to produce value. Notice how I phrase myself, reasonably likely, because we think probability. I cannot with certainty tell you that, hey, it's going to work. My world doesn't work that way with that level of certainty. So over with all my experience, I've sort of figured out the things that do tend to deliver value. I can train your staff and employees in marketing and sales. There's a lot of work to be done in email marketing and SEO and content creation, doing it right. Sometimes folks hire me to train their interns and ramp them up to a point where the intern is then becoming a marketing coordinator, and the intern can then write their own blog posts and launch their own campaigns. That can be a highly effective, cost-effective way of maintaining your marketing. And if you remember my analogy as couch to 5K, your intern that is now becoming full-time is kind of like going from couch to twice a week running regimen. So if you can make that intern hire profitable for your organization, then you can make the next hire, which could be the marketing director or marketing manager and so on. So you want to work yourself up. And then we have evaluate. I can evaluate and improve your existing marketing efforts. Look at how you're doing the work. A lot of folks just create the assets but don't connect the marketing campaigns. So we can get that going, and we can edit and create content as needed. So if you have any questions about all of that, and if you have anything to say, you can just email me at siam@strides.agency. So now let me pull up some questions. Let's see what's going here. Let's see. DIB are the doers, but the smaller may go through a middleman because they do not have full-time or expensive information security staff or experience. Yeah. So got a good question here. If DIB are the doers, will they go through a middleman or not? I mean, by and large, if you think about it, their revenue is so low. If they are compelled to follow cybersecurity needs, the first thing they're going to do is try to do it themselves. A small business owner takes pride in bootstrapping their operation. So, and it's not really that complicated, we think, But I can assure you, as a non-cybersecurity professional who's very interested in your profession, it is not easy for us to even do CMMC maturity level 1. You immediately run into issues where it's impossible. So the other question I got here is, if they're not looking for social media, on social media, including LinkedIn, where are they going to go find us? That's an awesome question. So let's see. The easiest thing that people do when they're looking for you is they're going to Google you. They want to generate options. The DIB sector is not going to know about CMMC AB marketplace. The AB has no recollection or understanding of the DIB sector. They are mostly about, training you guys in cybersecurity. So if the DIB sector is concerned, they're first going to Google. They will start generic. The typical buyer behavior is they will say, okay, I heard this thing called CMMC, the CMC. And their first set of sessions are just going to be about reading about it. So they're going to read about the DoD page, that's usually the first one, and they're going to see some prime pages, and they're going to be intimidated, and they're going to learn that they need to do a lot and they don't understand it. Then, depending on their knowledge, they can go both ways. They can either Google again for CMMC help, which is somebody saying, I don't know what this thing is, I need some help. Or if they have learned a little bit, they will say CMMC RP help in Huntsville, Alabama. I gave this example before too. That precise search query typically tells me as a marketer, somebody wants to buy from you. They're not just looking for generic information. They're looking for real stuff, real selling stuff. So if you look at the buying behavior of the DIB sector, typically they will start on search engines using these type of search queries, starting with broad search queries, then getting more specific. They're going to be watching videos to learn. That is going to be a big deal. There's a lot of great content on YouTube now. So if you're smart, you can target YouTube video audiences and hope that you got a slice of that pie. And then obviously some of them who are educated about the AB are going to go to the AB page and then look at the listing and possibly find you nearby. They may go to Google Maps, or they may go to their MSP and say, we are required to follow cybersecurity standards. What should we do? So in that case, it's smart to get ahead of the MSPs as well, because it allows you to get to it allows you to bypass the gatekeeper quickly. The MSPs show up often, and there's a reason for that. Awesome. So let me see if I have any other questions. Overall, I think these are the questions I got. So we still have 5 minutes. I'll let you guys go. And thank you so much for coming today. Hope you have a great day.